As director, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the Berkeley Shambhala Center. And I'd like to give a special welcome to those of you who are here for the first time. And hope that you have a positive connection with what the center offers. So it's my honor to be able to introduce and to welcome the Venerable Khandro Rinpoche back to the Bay Area. This is her 6th or perhaps 7th time back to the Bay Area. We were unable to decide how many times she's been here. And this is her only teaching program in her trip to the West Coast this time, so we're very fortunate to have her here. The Venerable Khandro Rinpoche is a lineage holder of both the Nyingma and the Kagyu schools of Tibetan Buddhism. She has also taught extensively in the Shambhala Mandala for almost 15 years. She is a student of her father, His Holiness the Mindrilling Trichin Rinpoche, who is the head of the Nyingma school. And I'm told that Mindrilling Trichin Rinpoche has personally blessed the Guru Rinpoche Tanka that we have here in the shrine room, so there is a presence of him in this room. Khandro Rinpoche has received extensive teachings from His Holiness the 16th Karmapa and Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche and many other masters. In 2003, she published her book, This Precious Life, Tibetan Buddhist Teachings on the Path to Enlightenment. She's currently the resident director and teacher at the Lotus Garden Retreat Center in Stanley, Virginia. And she also directs the Samten Se Retreat Center in northern India. And I'm told that her neighbors in rural Virginia refer to that center not as Samten Se, but as something to say. And with that, I'm sure that she has not only something to say, but something for us to remember this weekend.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And please turn the wheel of Dharma for us.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to begin with a little bit of supplication in the beginning. Muji jin of Johnson Pemangasar Dombola, Yamsen jogging or Dubne Pemaju Shazunda, Cordo, Khandro Mambo, Chechi Jasunda, and Chinja Lab Jesus and Goro Pema said the Hont and then Namda Kunja Rebejit and the Drobe. Jermaden the Longonsum the Yonze Dodget and Lasso and the Lavson Nanda Madeji, them as someone the Longonjona Jojo Calden Kujerman Zangaki, one chapel, Jantu Shabla Soa, then Namda Malan Sabim, Hemba, Lepemendozo Rodo. Shazorege says Ojan Lava, number Jewe, Power Soa, there's a home in Cheji, in Jeporane, the Sumsanje Kunjingo, near Rasim Choko Mosut. Savella me Shabla Soa, and the Chadawada Juji Shabada, Jesu Yera Kuji Soa, Gewa Jose Taki, Jesabatam, Jezobe, Chanju Cherngo, Saji Beji, Chushi Metodam, Rabliji. Sanji Shindo make them Bulwa in Drogan, Namda Shindo, Jobarai show. Good evening, everyone. So before starting, it's always amusing for me to listen to the introductions because it's something over the years that I've learned is never to trust them very much. What you read about and what you print on these internet web pages and so forth, you leave out all the interesting parts and you sort of do only the flowery parts of that person's life. And so many of the information that you all correct, I'm sure comes out of a lot of love and sharing of each other's information, but not always accurate, not always absolutely true. The book, for example, I've been clarifying that point for many, many years since it came out. I had nothing to do with it. And Helen Berliner, who is a very good editor of transcriptions, transcribed some of the talks, but the hard work, and I didn't write a single word in the book itself, but then they very kindly write our name in that. And so it comes from some of the talks, definitely, but to say that she is the author of such a book is, I wouldn't say the most, isn't an accurate information. Neither is being the director of Something Say and Lotus Garden and so forth. So directors are all sitting in front of me. The retreat center directors are sitting in front of me, and also the Lotus Garden is a community of people who have a retreat land together. And I go there once a year, twice a year for a month long. And that's about what I do. And so people are very kind. But that's something to say instead of something say is, I think, very, very accurate information, I would say. We were, some of the Sangha members were appearing before, I think, some municipality meetings to get a permit, zoning permit. And they had to clarify two names. One was Mindroling, and the other was Something Say. And Mindroling was read out as mind rolling, because so they follow the lineage of mind rolling, because it's spelled Mindrolling. So they thought it was, instead of Mindroling, they said that it as the lineage of mind rolling, and under the Charitable Institute of Something to Say. So instead of Something Say. I think, but I think worked very well, because they did get the zoning permit very easily. I would like to begin this evening by saying how happy I am to be back here, here in Berkeley, Shambhala Center. As you said, I've been here now quite a few times and have always had very good stays over here. But since I am always with Buddhist practitioners, it's always the Sangha I know more of than of anything else, of any other city, of the city itself. And the Sangha has always been very much connected to practicing and being very dedicated, and have always been kept together through the hard work and efforts of many, many people who've now worked for many years and are continuing, and many people who have worked very many years and have moved on to different places. But whenever any of the teachers have come here, they've always found a community of hardworking people who are practicing. Not only Shambhala Center, but as this whole West Coast, California is a very fortunate place that it has so many different diverse faiths, religions, practice centers. And if we just keep to Buddhist traditions, then I think as many as there are diverse Buddhist traditions, there probably is a Dharma center within that lineage in this coastal area, which is, I think, very, very nice, which is very good in that people, according to their own potential, according to their own needs, according to their own heart connections, can relate to different traditions, and from that gain insight, understanding, and be able to gain some benefit. And so that's very nice. The Shambhala lineage, of course, brought forth through the immense kindness and wisdom of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, has throughout the world always been a very important lineage of practice and learning. And besides the Shambhala lineage and the Shambhala community, in the coastal area, I'm more familiar with Gomde, Chogyam Nyima Rinpoche, and Chogyam Rinpoche's centers, who are also here, and I have an opportunity to sometimes go to them, and where I have seen some of you. And so it's always nice whenever anyone talks to me about San Francisco. So these are the two main things that I think about, is the Sangha of Gomde and the Sangha of Shambhala Center in San Francisco, as well as in Berkeley. And then I think, I hope in the beginning that it has been, since I met a few of you last year and the year before that, have been practicing well. As a Buddhist teacher, I would always say, how have you been practicing? And it's always a quiet wish and a hope that the person will always say, yes, good, the practice is always good, strong, everything is fine. Occasionally we do get that answer, but most oftentimes the answer is always, well, not so good. And that's always been an interesting thing for me to look at it and see. Why do you say that? Does it come out of humility? In the East, for example, if you say, how are you? The question, if you are going to answer, is, well, so-so. And that's a polite way of saying, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a polite expression of saying nothing too exaggerated or nothing too giving out of information. It's just a polite answer. So from that same perspective, if the answer is politely being given, that the practice is not so good, then I think that's fine. But if it is true, if the answer is true, then it is something to think about, is when you say, how have you been meditating or how have you been practicing the Dharma? And if the answer is that it is not so good, and most oftentimes if that is the answer that is being given, once in your life is fine, twice in your life is fine, maybe 3 times is also fine. But okay, every year, year after year, year after year, if that answer is being given, then there is something to think about. And being able to then understand what is the role of spirituality in your life. How do you connect with it? If you are going to go to a Dharma center and listen to a teaching, or if you are going to follow a faith and a path of practice, if you're going to create a shrine in your room, read a certain number of texts, call yourself a meditator or a student of so-and-so or a practitioner of such and such path of practice, it must come with an understanding of what does it mean to you. Simple sentence that we could use is, what does Dharma mean to you? What does Buddhism mean to you? Or any other faith or philosophy, whatever form of practice and meditation, contemplation that you may be practicing, to ask yourself and see, why do you do it? Why are you actually connected with that path of practice? Why do you sit in front of a shrine and in a certain posture and meditate in a certain way? And so today, some of the nuns who went out today came back and just very much, I think the last 1 or 2 hours, they were telling me about walking. And of course, when you walk the streets of Berkeley, you can see almost anything. And so they were talking about 2 people meditating beside the road. And so there's this same way. So why would you meditate? There's something that you are expressing. Either you are trying to do it for yourself, or you're trying to give out a message, or encourage or inspire some other person, or give across a certain statement that you wish to. But there are reasons. There is a motivation. There's a reason behind that decision that you have taken. And it becomes very important to work with that. Simply to do something isn't sufficient. You have to know why you're doing it. Why did you take that decision? Why did you take on that commitment? The reason why you took that commitment, and is it still the same? Has it shifted, progressed, dropped off, become something else, evolved into something else, grown better, less, doesn't matter, but what is the current relationship that you have now? And most importantly, what do you want to do out of it? What is the fruition level out of it? If this undercurrent question isn't worked with, then we often get stuck with just the outer shell, just the form. And the form leads definitely to jadedness, boredom, or sense of losing aim of why you are doing this. And from that, of course, one doesn't gain anything, and because there is no benefit, there is no result, there is no fruitioning, being able to bring that to becoming a cause of help for anyone else becomes very difficult. To go back a little bit, maybe some of you may have heard this story of mine, but some of you may not have. But I grew up in a family, of course, of all teachers, and it was kind of sort of concluded right from the time I was born where I was headed to. My father and all the teachers and the monks. I was born, grew up, and lived my entire life in a monastery. But among almost 500 to 600 men, there was only one woman with whom I grew up, and that was my mother. And she has always been a very stubborn person, very headstrong person, has to be able to put across her, or words across all the men that were there. And of course, because especially if you have all the titles of holinesses and eminences in front of that. But she, in her life, always wanted to become a doctor. And so it was her wish that her first child become a doctor. And so she wanted herself to become a doctor, but she married very young. At 16 or 17, she married His Holiness. And so she never could become a doctor. So she thought her eldest child would have to become a doctor, was very happy that it was a daughter. And so she thought this is a chance that she can... and then so she tried very hard with me. Of course, I didn't succeed, so she began to hope on my sister. That didn't work as well. So she's by now sort of given up on that. But I remember as I grew up and was being educated in a regular school, the sort of subject that I was supposed to study the most was medicine. But at a certain time, almost when you finish high school and you begin college, it occurred to me, because I was simultaneously studying Buddhism and the philosophy and Buddhism and meditation and medicine together. But it occurred to me, and it wasn't a kind of a very profound occurrence, again. It was just one of those lazy moments where where you choose between which one you're going to do and which one seems easier. It's not about benefiting sentient beings and, don't mistake it to be anything profound like that. It was about which would be the easier one, which would be sort of less risky and, at least not having to sit up so late and study and so forth. But while dissecting a frog, when you are working in the laboratory, the frog, of course, never revives, no matter how you, and it's not supposed to. My teachers told me it's not supposed to be revived. You're supposed to study the systems, the various organs and the systems in the body. But when the first time you actually cut up an animal, and it's a live animal, beautiful, and it doesn't wake up, it doesn't come back to life again, struck me at that moment that I would not be a good doctor at all. That if at any moment, if somebody's life was in my hands and I was responsible and that person died, I thought that kind of a risk is something at least I wouldn't take. As a Buddhist, I wouldn't take. Much better to become a nun and a teacher, a Buddhist teacher, and learn Buddhism. So I of course, gave up on school. Am I going too fast? No. Okay, all right. So I gave up in doing medical school. And then, of course, things happened. Almost, I think nowadays, today, when I look back, I begin to see that it's easier perhaps becoming a doctor. You kill a person once, say, out of negligence of some kind, you kill a person once. That's fine. You kill one person. Today, what I do, I can kill many, many times. Because you're working with minds. You're working with life. There is no actual cutting up of a person and sort of the consciousness of the body, of the person leaving the body. But on the other hand, if you think about it from a Buddhist philosophical and the teachings perspective of cause and effect, and the impact of words, and what you say, what you teach, and how you can actually sort of always mess with people's lives. So easy to do. Such an immense responsibility that, again, from Buddhist teachings perspective, if you see karma and look at it from the karma's perspective, karma is cause and effect. If you look at it from birth and rebirth's perspective, then you begin to realize the immense impact and influence, as well as responsibility that you have when you relate to something that is just words in appearance and in sound, but at the same time affects a person over lifetimes. The goodness of the person can be influenced by that. The weakness of the person can be influenced by that. Discouragement can come from that. Encouragement can come from that. Positivity can come from that. Negativity can come from that. Schism and aversions and sort of sadness and suffering, and a person never being able to overcome all the negativities. You can do that. You can influence that. You can influence a lot of goodness, and we always hope that that is what is happening. But the impact of negativity that can occur, something that these days I'm beginning to really think and really sort of occurs to me more often. Now, if you see it, again, within your own self, that influence, you'll have to say it's not only the teachers, but it's also yourself. Whenever you sit in meditation, you'll have to think about that responsibility of being a meditator. Whenever you're here in an evening, on a Friday evening, listening to a teaching or a talk, you come in with a certain motivation, with a certain intention. And then there's this whole understanding that you have to have of the responsibility of actually being here, of being someone who spends that 7 to 9 p.m. time slot with some kind of a sacred philosophy, isn't it? Even if it is on your own, when you are sitting in a meditation cushion and you do some kind of contemplation, doesn't matter which contemplation, you have to understand that it comes with saying, I am doing so and so. I am going to take on so and so. And so the whole question that you have to look into yourself all the time is, out of that, what is the fruition that is coming out of it? To myself, I would always say, 40 years of Buddhist philosophy, what have I gained from that? As the fruition, what is it that I today have? Likewise, one would say, in a very much more smaller time frame, you could say, since I did 2 hours of meditation, what comes out of that? What should come out of that? If that examination, self-examination on the result and what you are generating as fruition based upon the different methods that you apply in spirituality isn't being examined carefully, then aimlessness begins to happen. Aimlessness then always leads to what I think is the current difficulty that most spiritual faith, and now I'll stick only to Buddhism because that's where we are. So the Buddhist communities face today is lots of diligent students, but the required and the expected result not being there so much. And the common problem being is people become aimless. People lose track with their intention and their true motivation. Part reason seems to be is the immense amount of material that is there. Spoken words by the teachers, the repetitions of this is the right motivation, this is what you should be doing, this is what you should be looking at, the number of Dharma books that are there, tapes and different forms of media that are there. It influences the mind to assuming that your motivation is already correct or that your motivation is being kept intact. And we all know that the motivation has to be selfless compassion. So we assume that that is the motivation when we meditate. That is the motivation with which we come to a Dhamma center. That is the motivation with which we follow teachers. That is the motivation with which we practice any contemplation. Is it really? You have to really look inside and take a very fresh examination within oneself to check one's intention and motivation. Only then can the actual fruition evolve from the path of practice that you are doing. And so over these last 1 or 2 years, what I've begun to, I spent some time thinking about this because of having now sort of, I think, 17, 18 years of being with Western students. I think in one aspect, on a positive note, I would say there's a lot of diligence. Easterners aren't as diligent as Western students are. That's one thing. That's very true. Second very good thing about the Western meditators are that their coming into meditation comes out of their own intention, their own sort of willingness, their own experience of life. And so there's a much more mature connection to the path of the practices. But these good qualities and several others often are dampened by one thing, is, again, not really having an accurate understanding and balance between intention and result. So there's a little bit of a gap in between that. Intention often is very profound. Path of practice is paradox to the intention. And of course, that influences the result. But because of not being able to look carefully into this aspect, many times we find that when we speak with meditators or meditation students, we find them always thinking, I am meditating to find, let's say, common results that you all aspire for is enlightenment, number one. Number two is genuine compassion, so that you can benefit all sentient beings. And number three is just bodhisattva action, very kind actions, wisdom, kindness, love, being able to share and care and become a good person and so forth. That's the intention with which one begins. But in terms of the fruition, the method of meditation that you all apply often is a sense of, well, enlightenment. emptiness. Fruition everyone has, because you've read so many Dharma books, you've received so many teachings, so you all know the conclusion is going to be emptiness, enlightenment, luminosity and emptiness, nothing as it is, Dharma Dhatu, Dharmakaya, and so on and so forth. So there is this hope that motivates you, and there is that end, the result, that you all know where you need to go to. And then the meditation, I won't say anything about it. Look at it on your own. You have to think. How much time do you spend with it? With what kind of attitude do you actually do it? And then how much of meditation are you able to take into post-meditation? Is your post-meditation, that is your daily life and all the activities, just a permeating quality of the meditation, or is it in contrast? Is there no reflection of the meditation in post-meditation? Are they two opposites, or do they look the same? And then there is an even pervasive quality that doesn't seem to be sort of abrasive to one another. And so when we begin to look at that, then we begin to find, problem areas. And the problem area, if it is all gathered into one, I would say, is not really understanding your own intention properly. And there's no harm, because there's this mistaken belief that if you have a lesser intention, or a weaker intention, or a mundane intention, samsaric intention, worldly intention, common intention, basic intention, then that is almost seen as a negative thing. We always say, for example, Buddha taught lesser vehicle, higher vehicle, and then the secret vehicle, the secret Mantrayana vehicle. And then there's always this ego play that we think, well, I won't be so optimistic as to go to the Mantrayana, but Mahayana is the popular gap because Maha, the term means great, so it's a great vehicle. It's also that which teaches love and compassion, all those profound ideas. So there's this human psychological mind that begins to play tricks to your own self where you think you're being humble in choosing a middle potential. But you really don't want to look at the lesser potential. So Hinayana is for monks and nuns, it's for the Theravadians, it's something that the Sri Lankans and then the Thailand and the Vietnamese do. This is something that we are afraid. So secret Mantrayana, mostly, you haven't gone to seminary if you're Shambhala because of that. That's sort of stuck over there. Or it's considered to be a very high potential. Maybe you're too quick. Some people have sneaked their way into going to different, different avenues and quickly gotten into Vajrayana just to find out what this whole Vajra diamond, indestructible completion path means. But Mahayana, if you look at it, there's this whole thing about greater vehicle. Even in teachings, it's very interesting. Whenever I've done it myself, so I can't speak about others, but when you look at it, when you grow up, you think, and you really, as a meditator, and for example, as you said, we receive teachings from all these remarkable bodhisattvas and great enlightened teachers. Living with them your entire life, you begin to think ego is not a problem, or at least not such a big problem. But even I remember when we received teachings, my own attitude often was the same thing. I don't know whether you all have that problem, but for me it has always been is that you don't try to exaggerate by saying higher potential. That you don't attempt. I'm not of the highest potential. But there's definitely a reluctance towards the lesser potential. And you keep thinking, medium potential seems right, isn't it? Maybe I am not, but I can be a medium potential. I don't have to get stuck at the lesser potential. Now, when you look at it in that way and you apply it to your own meditation, and again, whichever kind of contemplation that you do or meditation that you do, we begin to look inside and then find some sense of repulsion or sort of revulsion, or a kind of a rejection of the idea that it is bad to have mundane wishes if you are a spiritual practitioner. That you have to talk about selfless compassion. You have to talk about bodhicitta. You have to talk about enlightened activities of compassion. And your title here is also the relationship of enlightened bodhicitta with the four karmas, or something like that, isn't it? And so if you look at it, what does it say? Whenever any center suggests a title of a program, for me it's a fun time because it sort of... I spoke about it. Now, this has been a big issue with the Berkeley Shambhala Center here about the title itself. But, what is interesting is to always look back and see, because this really is reflection of where we are as meditators, as practitioners. And so, however, because our own current potential, we've never taken time to look into our own current potential, and on top of that, not having examined ourselves and our intentions properly, on top of that, we are reluctant to reveal the reality of our own hope and fear. And then we project and we fabricate our intention. We sort of imagine ourselves to be of a middling potential or a higher potential. In some cases, higher potential also. And so we keep thinking, my motivation in meditation is to be selflessly kind to the others. Untrue, most often times. That is not our intention. Sometimes we think meditation to attain knowledge and wisdom of the absolute truth. That is also not true. That's not our first priority at this time. We think enlightenment, shunyata, emptiness, peace, cessation. Also not true, most often times. These are byproducts. Often, if it happens, delightful. We'd be very happy. And there's a secret hope that accidentally we become selfless, compassionate. We accidentally bump into enlightenment. Accidentally, everything ceases, and there is no longer any kind of duality. Those hope I don't argue with. So there is a secret hope, definitely. But the intention and hope are two different things. Intention in our meditation still is to have another day without problems. Yeah. Intention is to live a long life, not to be like your friend who suffered and got diagnosed with cancer. You immediately pray when you do tonglen for another person. You always say, may this person have healing and cure and be free from suffering. But there's always a secret wish. May I not ever be in that person's shoes. Isn't it? And so, financial problems, that may not happen. But as meditators, there is this force, like a peer pressure that young children have in schools, high schools and colleges, where they have this whole peer pressure. Likewise, communities have begun. And the whole influence of the growth of spirituality has begun to develop a very fabricated language, which pressurizes people into then becoming sort of very good at hiding that intention within one's own self, and we become sort of a bipolar disease begins to develop. There's this almost a schizophrenic state where your own real intention and potentials have to be constantly suppressed instead of being true to that. That whole thing seems to be because lesser potential and having mundane hope and fear and then being a spiritual meditator to become free from that is almost seen like a negative thing. That's the bad thing to do. From a very much the profound teachings and the Dhamma's perspective, then we can say, yes, it is not a good thing to do because you're capable of doing better. But it never says that it is a bad thing to do which you must conceal and suppress so that you begin to pretend something that you're not capable of at this moment. And so spirituality must come out of becoming a clique, a club that you have to have certain credentials and qualifications to become members of, but must go down to the basics of dealing with humanness and human hope and fear and human wishes, aspirations, securities and insecurities. And since we've come to a point where this is not openly done, you have no other choice but to work with your own self, realize your own responsibility to your own self. Being a person who says, I have this hope, and I'm a practitioner hoping for this, and I am a practitioner and meditating to be free from this fear, and being very realistic and true to yourself and making your practice such that it becomes something that can give you the fruition of that hope and aspiration is a very good way to meditate. Tibetan, those who have begun to practice Tibetan Buddhism and the lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, the Sakya Kagyu Nyingma Gelug, all of us often have the bad habit of sort of looking. Even in 1987, when I first came to the Bay Area, in Seattle at that time, I had the opportunity of working with Jodo Shinshu and the Nichiren traditions of Japanese Buddhism at that time. And I remember coming in with a kind of, it's the Tibetan Buddhist mentality these days, I call that, is where you think, oh, we are talking about Bodhichitta and enlightenment, non-duality, Tathagata Garbha, Sugata Garbha, Buddha nature, and so forth. And then working with some people who were, for example, the Amitabha Pure Land Buddhists. If you look at them, they're very, very sort of genuine in their aspirations. May I have long life, may I live long, may I be free from sicknesses and health and so forth. And we meditate and we think, oh, they're so relative, isn't it? They're so basic. As a meditator, you should be thinking about everything is emptiness in nature, and this is shunyata, and absolute primordial is the primordially enlightened nature of your own inherent heart, and so on and so forth. But in doing so, if you're capable of remaining really untouched by the relativities of hope and fear, that's very fine. There's no arguing about that. But then there's also the hidden insecurities of your mind that you have to be very true to. And when you're not true to that, this very strong discrepancy within your own, the struggle comes in, where you want to do something, you cannot, and what you really want to work with, you're not able to be true to that. And so the conflict happens where you then begin to find in the Tibetan Buddhist meditation, you will find the conflict of never being able to understand non-duality. If you're relative and you're true to the relative appearances and relative hopes and fear, you always will feel guilty because there's always that pressure in your mind that will say, no, but you're not supposed to have attachment. You're supposed to be beyond ego grasping. You're supposed to look at the true nature of emptiness. You are not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do this. Look at the way we have conversations with one another. I've joked about this so many times. I'm sure I'm repeating myself. But I've always said, I do not like to socialize with Buddhists. That's my personal thing. I can come to a Dharma center and I will always be there to give the talk that I'm required to give. But apart from that, you'll never find me unless it's a situation I cannot avoid. And that's because you cannot talk normal. Who I am, for example, the name that I carry and my teachers, whatever I've learned from my teachers, they come and they expect things to be, you cannot say something like, it's a nice cup of coffee. They'll immediately say, but Rinpoche, you're supposed to look at the non-dual nature of the coffee, isn't it? But that coffee is relative. You have to say something very profound. You cannot say something like, this is a nice blue sky. It has to be Dhammacaya's profound blue pancake. And so where the conversation itself becomes so fabricated, so very pretentious, then it comes to a point where it influences your life. And so relativity, you cannot be really true to the relativity because you're forced to always look at the absolute nature of impermanence, absolute nature of emptiness, absolute nature of non-duality, luminosity, Dhammakaya, Dhammadhatu, and so on and so forth. Then you shift on to becoming absolute, and then you try to say, yes, everything is my mind's projection. This is not true. This is not real. But someone hits you, someone is insulting you, someone takes your job away, you get inflicted with a disease. There is no absoluteness in that at that moment, isn't it? We're not capable of remaining with that. There's that tinge of sadness. There's that pang of jealousy and aggression within our own selves. There's the craving of desire. There's that anger of competitiveness, of your own insecurities, your own hope, and if not yours, your children, your husband, your sons and daughters, your family, your responsibility. So what happens is relative and absolute, we don't know where to go. Out of that, what happens is we then, on top of that, to make things much more complicated, then we have teachers coming and teach, Sangha members expecting you to do something. You're supposed to be always encouraging and inspiring and an example to the others. You read all those profound books. And the Western sort of culture of guilt, that further suppresses and makes things much more worse within one's own mind. So what happens is, intellectually, your mind cultivates a very deeper understanding of profound ideologies and views and different kinds of understandings. And your speech, your mind, your mental patterns, and your body, however, is unable to contain that. And so, Buddhist world evolves as a world that speaks best on selfless compassion and does worst in many cases We have that problem. We have that problem. We cannot say this is all negative, because in some ways, people who meditate Buddhism, even from a very mistaken perspective, let's say, are often, with the world as it is today, I've always thought that they're always very, very good people. But again, we're not working on the optimistic side today. Let's look at a little bit on the negative side. And so to bring that, to sort of highlight on that, we find that as much time as we spend learning about compassion, how much are we able to actually do it in action? And often today I find that people who are not so spiritual and do not claim to be meditators are often kinder and less complicated. Likewise, people of other religion, other faith, Christianity, for example, are much more active in terms of involving themselves in acts of goodness or helping other people. Maybe the intention sometimes is more sort of the missionaries or to convert or so and so forth. That may be, but still, there's a lot of effort in generosity and giving. In comparison to that, Buddhists often are some of the most sort of self-absorbed people, very, very much into themselves. And ideas always about long-term planning, about after I am enlightened, then I'm going to be selfless, then no attachment and so forth. But currently at this moment in your life, never sharing, never caring, never gentle, never really patient. When that kind of a situation evolves and we look into what is the cause of it, then we often find it is this inability to really reconcile and look into one's own self and one's own potential, and to actually have the courage of working from ground zero or from the very beginning. It's not necessary. For Buddhist meditators, it's very important to understand it's not necessary to have profound understandings in the beginning at all. None of us are capable of doing that. It's in the beginning, it's very important to start knowing one principle, and that is that to be able to understand Buddhism, which means Buddhism, or to understand Buddhist truth, means truth as it is. That's what it is. We do not have a God. We do not have a creator. We do not have a book to believe in. All that is the Buddhism is going to teach is Buddhist meditation leads you to understanding a truth that is neither my truth, neither your truth, but truth as it is. And that it is a sort of a path and guidelines and support and methods may be given to you based upon other people's experiences, whom we refer to as bodhisattvas and Buddhas. But ultimately, the truth which is inherent must be discovered by you. That's what Buddhists talk about. So from that perspective, one has to know that when it is a path that leads to the realization of the truth, it cannot be achieved ever without it being beginning from the platform of honesty. If you cannot be honest, and if the path cannot be honesty, then it cannot lead to truth. Fabricating and fabricating, deliberating and deliberating, all of the different kinds of deliberations and fabrications that we pile upon are only going to make matters much more complicated than actually leading to the genuine sort of truth of one's own inherent nature. Therefore, in the beginning, in terms of the next 4 or 5 talks that are there, what I would like to do is to really work with Buddha's way of expounding the teachings, and that is relationship between intention and result. That's the main thing. For example, the title of the talk itself says Bodhichitta's relationship to 4 karmas. And 4 karmas, usually Shije Wangzha, we say in Tibetan, Shiva is pacifying. The first karma or first activity is called pacifying activity. Second is called enriching activity, Jeba. Third, in English, usually you say magnetizing, but we also may translate it as empowering. And the fourth is subjugating or wrathfulness, Tragbo. 4 activities that we talked about. And it was interesting when I was looking at the title of the text, and I was also joking with Jigme, who's coordinating this visit, is about, you have to be very careful in how you want to really work with a certain topic. Buddhism is a vast enough topic that you can just take words from anywhere and make a semblance or connection in any kind of possible ways. But that's not the point over here. Bodhicitta from this perspective would be is the enlightened heart. Whatever is true, whatever is the genuine heart as it is, nature as is, which is inherent of one's own self. 4 activities, or the 4 karmas as they are usually referred to, commonly these are 4 terms that are very connected to the Vajrayana practices. Within the secret Mantrayana practices of creation stage, for example, we often talk about these 4 remarkable activities or actions that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas manifest. And a very flowery talk can be made about how we can exude pacifying energy and enriching energy and so on and so forth, but that would not be beneficial. That's good to listen to, but it's not beneficial for one's own self. Therefore, in terms of connecting this topic, I would say is much more helpful for you if you look at it from the perspective of potential, your own potential. What is it, the current potential that you have as a meditator? Potential of generosity. How much generosity can you really practice? Potential of love. How much can you actually generate love? Potential of patience. How much patience can you generate within your own self? When you look into your own self and you realize your potential, and you take time to really examine your potential and your intention at this moment, then it's a very good starting point of how to work with the teachings and the meditation. Take an example. For example, if you're saying, I'm going to meditate for half an hour just to gain some peace of mind, quietness of my own mind, some kind of pacification of my own mind, that itself is the pacifying karma. That itself is the peacefulness that is there. Much better than a heart and a mind in turmoil that goes out to pacify other things. Isn't it? Likewise, in terms of, let's say, enriching. Enriching is about healing yourself, working with your own mind, enriching your own potential and your own wisdom, knowing that with whatever hopes and insecurities that you may be struggling with, that there is a possibility to develop that, possibility to develop your potential, possibility to increase your knowledge, possibility to really expand your wisdom, be able to go more closer to the truth, be able to look inherent of one's own self. That is much more the enriching quality within one's own self. Likewise, we talk about, again, let's say, giving out love, giving out kindness, giving out generosity. That's all very good. If you're capable of doing it, one should do it. But if you're not capable of doing it, rather than become disillusioned with your own self, affecting your own confidence and courage, it's better first that you work with yourself, letting go of that idea that as a Buddhist, I'm not supposed to think about myself. Because that's, again, if you are capable of not thinking about yourself, fine. If you're not capable of, at least develop the courage to say you are not capable of. That's the better way to go. Third, then again, in terms of empowering and, again, sort of magnetizing the people, empowering the people, all of those different things that we do, that's all very nice. And it's temporary, and for a temporary moment, it's very inspiring. But that can never work to your advantage best until you empower yourself. Unless you realize your own potential, your own inherent nature, call it Buddha nature or primordial Rigpa or whatever, Mahamudra mind or TGS or whatever you may call it. But empowering, magnetizing is the confidence that you build in yourself of first realizing as a human being you are, foremost of all the species, the only one capable of attaining realization. Of that, how much are you confident? How confident are you that you are actually capable of at any moment giving up anger? You can do that. At any moment that you can practice generosity and kindness over aggression and anger or jealousy, that you are capable of. But it's lacking in courage to do so. Empowering would be working with that quality. Subjugation and the wrath, again, all the different kinds of, again, explanations that can be given is much more about non-aggression. Wrathfulness or the subjugation is nothing other than being able to subdue the rampant, crazy mind that we have within our own selves. When you can control, when you can tame, when you can subdue your own klesha mind that is constantly generating all kinds of discursiveness, that is the moment where the display of that subjugation, the fourth karma, can come about within one's own self. Therefore, all these 4 karmas or the 4 activities need to be seen as just manifestations of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta or enlightened, some very simple for those of you who may be very new. Bodhicitta is the term that is very commonly today used to simply mean compassion, selfless compassion. And a much more literal translation, bodhicitta, is always referred to as enlightened heart of genuine selfless kindness. And so that enlightened kindness or compassion that we need to develop within one's own self manifests in the form of these 4. And so in the beginning, if one wants to really sort of understand your relationship to the Buddhist practices or meditation, as I said, kindness towards yourself is essential. Being kind to yourself, realize the intention with which you practice. With one factor is that while you are in touch with your own motivation at this moment, always keep room to progress on that. If you're doing it for yourself today, be happy that you are true to that. But there should always be a room for some amount of development that you can extend it to 2 other people tomorrow, to your family, or to some more people. There's always some amount of room that you have to leave that this is not it. Yeah. Realizing and being true to yourself, again, has the downside, is where people are deliriously happy about having found that honesty with which you are practicing, but you're never able to go beyond that. And again, another very common example that I use is my grandmother. My grandmother, my mother's mother, is a very devout Buddhist, and she's a very good student and very sort of a vocal disciple, let's say, of Chebje Tunjum Rinpoche. Both my mother's father and mother both were students of Tunjum Rinpoche. But she has, lived her life with all these remarkable teachers, and she has His Holiness as her son-in-law, and her grandchildren are all the teachers and so forth. So in a family like that, we often have conversations about Buddha nature and the truth and so on and so forth. But in all her life, my grandmother has been one of those who's opposed absolute truth completely. For her, she says she's very happy in her relative world. She is very faithful to Amitabha. She prays to Amitabha. She does her practices much more than any one of us. And she is absolutely sure that when she dies, she will be born in the pure land of Amitabha. And so she's very much there. And we try to tell her, perhaps you should look at the nature of your mind. She gets very upset. And so for her, it's very, very straightforward, very, very much over there. But while, as I'm saying, which is very nice, very true to her own potential and her own understanding, her own hopes and fear. But what I do find is, in that aspect, is that almost stopping opposition to anything else. When you stop the growth of your own potential, then that's not what we're talking about. When we say start from number 1, start from being true to your own hopes and fears, and be able to really make that as the foundation of beginning, so that that confusion of relative and absolute doesn't come about, discrepancy between the 2 truths doesn't come about. We don't, however, mean that there shouldn't be a sense of always knowing that that can change. The lesser needs to, does at some point, change to medium potential, because that's what you're capable of doing. Likewise, the medium potential does need to advance into becoming a much more strong, fuller potential, larger potential, ultimately being able to let go of all falsities and be able to really realize enlightened truth. That being very important to keep in mind. However, in the beginning, when you really look at your own self, the first potential is to always work with, in relationship to the 4 karmas, is to always work with stillness of mind. Pacifying activity, which usually in the Vajrayana terms means creation of peaceful environment around yourself as well as within your own self. But for a meditator who starts from the very beginning is really to work with stillness of your own mind. Bodhicitta, the enlightened heart of compassion, cannot really benefit oneself or other sentient beings if the mind of the meditator is not peaceful. Whether it is through shamatha meditation or whether through any other form meditation or formless meditation, it is essential that one really establishes ground of genuine ease, genuine peacefulness within one's own self. In all the different, receiving all the teachings, reading the many different books or the different techniques of meditation that you all have, if the ground of your own mind isn't familiar with stillness, with quietness, most of the teachings and the different kinds of practices that you do won't make much sense at all. Words such as enlightenment, selflessness, truth, enlightenment, Buddha nature, primordial wisdom, are all cryptic words which has no meaning to us if a person doesn't cultivate stillness of one's body, speech, and mind. Therefore, ground, even if it sounds like a very simple method of meditation, your body, taming and training it to be really still, speech quietening down, mentally and verbally, orally, all the different sounds that you can make, being able to really lessen it to a genuine moment of silence, taming and training your mind to become still, that it is not active. Sort of the most difficult thing that we can let go of these days is that wisecracking mind that we have, that has to be intelligent all the time. Any little thing that you understand must be articulated. Unless you articulate it, that you're not satisfied with it. Giving up that is very difficult. And so being able to be content in not articulating something that you think is good or wise. Highest of the highest and the most profoundest of the profoundest things must be given the freedom to be without your articulation of it. Isn't it? So some sense of loosening up, being able to really let go of the body, speech, and the mind so that the body is still, speech is still, mind is still. When that stillness in your own self is stabilized, most things that we spend so much time reading, hearing from other people, and learning seems to all sort of not become so important. While they're all very necessary, but there are so many words, so many things to learn, so many classifications, so many divisions, so many different methods, so many different lineages, and so forth. But within the stillness, as a meditator experiences that, there comes a moment when you will be able to sort of gather all the words into one moment, gather all the lineages into one moment, gather all the different methods into one moment, where sense of having to become wise or having to be able to classify them in all these different categories and lineages no longer become necessary. And the simplicity of stillness allows the meditator to then form the first foundation. When that foundation of stillness of the body, speech, and mind is obtained, you will find that it is much bigger leap into understanding all the words that we spoke about, Buddha nature, selflessness, enlightenment, all these different things that we use, different labels that we use, different designations that we use to all mean the same thing, becomes not necessary to be even sort of expressed in so many words or be given some kind of name. Stillness, therefore, is the first pacifying activity that one must encourage within one's own meditation. In the beginning, not struggling, as I said, with the thing, oh, this is a selfish thing to do, or I should be actually going out there helping others and so forth, not getting into that trip, but being able to say nothing can be achieved, not even one act of kindness can be achieved if the meditator himself or herself isn't a stable person. And that stability is with the natural ease of stillness of the body, speech, and mind. On the ground of that peacefulness, of that pacifying environment that you create, then gradually work with what is then, as the four karmas, since we're working with that then, would be the, I would say, the enriching or the jeva. Enriching, again, is many different ways of going through it. But in terms of our meditation and our meditative life, enriching is virtue. You have to work with virtue. And today, the biggest problem, I think, many of the, at least I would say, people that we work with, the Tibetan Buddhists work with, is over-intellectualization of everything and really being empty in anything. Something that always fascinates me is the American way of life, where everything is on loan, isn't it? And so, so for Easterners who are much more used to savings, isn't it? In the Western way of life, I think it's not only America, but many countries today, is where people borrow from the bank or every standing of virtuous actions, and almost a sense of careless attitude when it comes to acquiring merit. It's very simple. one doesn't want to encounter adverse circumstances. One doesn't want suffering. One seems to want happiness, and not only happiness, but a lot of good things. A lot of wisdom, a lot of realization, a lot of, confidence and courage and skillful methods and bodhisattvahood and so on and so forth, accomplishment of all different kinds of realization, enlightenment. But what is it that you actually have in your own self? As a savings, as a deposit, what is it that you really have is we don't do anything. Our wants and our not wantings, want of happiness and not wanting of suffering, however, cannot be controlled at all because we never, although we are believers of cause and effect, are never actually working with the ideology of cause and effect at all. As Buddhists, our whole foundation of Dharma and our practice is based upon cause and effect. Is there anyone here who doesn't know cause and effect? All of us know about it. As a Buddhist, we do not believe in anything, but we believe in karma. But adherers of the karma and the philosophy of cause and effect, how much of that do we remind ourselves in our daily life? We never do that. You ask a Buddhist most oftentimes about emptiness, and even anyone who's not even a good speaker will be able to at least speak 10 minutes about Buddha nature or emptiness or something like that. Ask them what are the 10 virtuous actions. Very few people know about it. Isn't it? And so, what are the 10 virtuous actions? What are the 10 unvirtuous actions? Well, ethically, how many are the different vows that a Buddhist needs to keep? And you talk about ethics to Buddhists, then most of them will disappear. It's a common thing is that where we are in Buddhism and we talk about non-duality, we have a room full of people. You talk about something as, fantastic as, the dot or something like that. You can just come up with anything. Isn't it? And then if you want to really get many people, you say the blazing dot. As Shabalians, you'd really be able to understand this, isn't it? But then if you say ethics, 2 people turn up. But it reflects a lot about ourselves. It's not about anyone. Sangha is nobody but our own selves. And then that usually is not because you don't like ethics. Everyone likes it. Everyone knows it's important. But we don't cultivate that. Because it talks about training yourself. You don't say certain things. You don't do certain things. You don't think certain things. You're supposed to think this way. You're supposed to work this way. You're supposed to say this way. Don't lie. Don't gossip. Don't slander. Speak gently. Don't be angry. Give this up. Give alcohol up. Give up sexual misconduct. Be kind. Be gentle. And then we think, oh yes, lesser potential people. And so in that way, when that happens, karma, what happens to karma? What is it that you are creating in your life? You want happiness. You want peace. You want realization. And more than that, you want to help other sentient beings, but with what? Empty words and intellectualization of theories and profound knowledge is not going to be helpful. You know that. Life passes by. We are not unfamiliar with the topic of impermanence either, isn't it? And then sadness grows in one's own mind. The conflict grows in one's own mind. And then we do even much more, fall into a much more complication where we try to deny ourselves. And we find reasons to then divert our mind from the truth to actually those fabricated thoughts so that we can just delay the truth one more day. It's not that we don't know the absolute true nature. It's inherent and can't get closer than that. And we all know about it. But this flow of our own habitual tendencies of denial, of negating, one more day in ignorance, one more day in denial, one more day again and again doing the same things. And as an intelligent, wise person, this is something that we know. And the conflict becomes bigger and bigger, and that conflict brings about greater bitterness in ourselves. And that bitterness again and again comes out in our actions. And so we know all about generosity and its different classifications, but we never do that. We know patience and all its divisions and subclassifications, but we never practice that. And because of that, growth and genuine progress of the person never happens. When you look into our own teacher's life, look at Khandro Rinpoche, or Dujum Rinpoche, or Kamapa, Jawa Kamapa, or Chichen Rinpoche, Benor Rinpoche. Look at all the Talung Citta Rinpoche, Tushik Rinpoche, all the great teachers of our generation. If you look into their life and we say, how come they were able to do it? How come they're so enlightened? How come they're so much, their bodhisattva activity is able to benefit so many sentient beings? What is it that we don't do? And the one thing is, there is no discrepancy between their view and action. In ourselves, it is there. View, there's not much of a problem. Everyone has quite profound views. But in terms of actions that would enrich your life to be able to personify that view, that we don't do. Generosity, in genuine generousness. When, for example, living with these great teachers, their one instruction to us was, door of the house should never be closed to anyone. My father, His Holiness's principle in life has been never to say no to anyone. And so sense of opening up to anyone, any moment, however way you can be helpful. So when you say, my philosophy, my dharma teaches me to be kind, period. No more arguing about that. Buts and ifs, maybes and perhaps, but not, and so on and so forth. I got this and I didn't get that. Sense of, if this is dharma, then yes, I need to practice genuine kindness. In whatever way I can be best of use, and however way, whatever I can say or do that can be of best use at this moment, that I will do it. No strategy, no planning. Flexible, pliable, and very, very much present at every moment so that it can evolve as best as it can be taken advantage of by the other person so that it can benefit the other person. Now that is the path of Gyewa, path of virtue. There's virtue in every action, virtue in every speech, virtue in every thought, and when you keep planting the seeds of virtue, all adverse circumstances do arise as positive circumstances. Your words carry more weight, your activities are able to benefit more sentient beings, you have less anger, you are more kind, and so the evolving of the environment becomes the result of the seeds that you have planted, which you and I don't do it. And so we hope and we aspire, but we never plant the seeds of virtue, and the harvesting, therefore, of happiness never happens. Enriching quality, the second karma that the meditators need to really do is enrich your life with virtuous actions. Rather than trying to explain emptiness to a person who has no interest in your family, be kind, share, be gentle, be less irritable, less angry, genuinely be patient. Many Buddhists say, family members don't understand why I am a meditator and so forth. It is logical for them not to understand. You disappear every Tuesdays and Thursdays, but there is no change in your attitude. But if there is a genuine transformation, and if you really are able to practice what you are coming on Tuesdays and Thursdays or Saturdays and Fridays to learn, that can be really exuded over time in your attitude and in your conduct, that is what is Dharma. After all, at the time of death, why do you and I study and practice meditation? Is not to tell another person what Dhamma Dhatu is like, but to be able to breathe easier the last breath that we may have without regrets. And so enrich your life with Dhamma. Be able to really make it something that is resembling of the hours of sitting in meditation, hours of listening to the talks and teachings, that there must be. Who else would take the first step but that meditator himself or herself to be the first one to say sorry, to be the first one to be helpful, to be the first one to make the effort of patience, of kindness, of gentleness, of lying less, of taking less advantage of other people, of being able to practice genuine compassion, genuine kindness, love others, have less competitiveness, less jealousy, less hatred, less arrogance. Likewise, when that virtue increases in yourself, and even if it is for a selfish reason, such as you yourself wanting happiness, therefore you are exerting effort in virtuous activity, still bodhicitta is being practiced. That kind of relative, very, very selfish bodhicitta is actually very much more to the advantage of the others then profound intellectualization of sort of bodhicitta that others never feel from you. I've always said, if people were all clairvoyant, they would know how pure our intentions and our heart were, isn't it? But when most people have to do with actions and speech, they'd rather see it, they'd rather hear it, than to try and sort of read our minds and seeing how our intentions were selfless and compassionate. Likewise, in the terms of, again, bodhicitta actions, or being able to really practice compassion. Third activity, which usually is empowering, or as you would say, magnetizing, as is translated. Wangwa is the Tibetan word that we use, and that is about confidence. Meditators, just as much as stillness and virtue, the two things that we talked about this evening. Eventually, however, that is also not sufficient. Stillness is very helpful. Likewise, being virtuous is very helpful. But stillness and virtue, both of them will encounter tremendous difficulties if confidence and courage isn't cultivated within the mind of the meditator. At the level of the third karma, at the level of the empowering, there is no other way that the meditator can now progress other than by being able to come to exerting a lot of diligence in understanding true nature of your own self. Being able to really have genuine confidence and courage to go beyond appearance and then make decisions based upon first impressions and appearance, and not be able to go deeper than that into seeing nature as is, particularly your own nature, that then does not allow the growth and the development of virtue or of the stillness within one's own self. And so empowering, or being able to magnetize, is to be able to really gain the strength of insight of one's own nature. From the Mahayana teachings, basically the two truth, relative and absolute truth, relative truth of appearance and the absolute truth of the nature of the appearance are often spoken about in Buddhism. Today, I think this is not such a very difficult topic because of the accessibility. So perhaps there may be a few of you who are very new. But for most of you, you're familiar that in Mahayana teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, you'll often find a lot of influence on mind meditation. What is the nature of mind? Nature of mind as it is, as it appears, and beyond as it appears, to looking at nature as is. So the appearance of mind, such as our thoughts, those are often called relative truth. And the essence of what is deeper than just the relative appearance, that is often called the absolute truth. Both of them are indivisible. There is the appearance and there is the nature, the essence of that appearance. And therefore, the true truth often is encouraged. However, in Vajrayana Buddhism, the same philosophy of the true truth is explained through creation and completion stages. Because very oftentimes we have difficulty as human beings. We have always the habitual tendency of working with forms and objects. The senses play a very important part in our life. Most of our decisions, our thought processes, our understanding is assisted by something that can be seen visually, something that can be heard, something that can be smelt or felt, or the mind consciousness has to have a sensation of it, has to have a feeling of it. So until the senses are gratified in being content with their own capacities, the belief or the confidence in that belief is obstructed. So when meditators are introduced to such a concept as mind is empty because you cannot find it, all appearances are essentially empty because if you are going to see the compositeness of appearances, you'll find that ultimately you cannot find anything that is permanent and existing. So this theory is again and again examined, and then we say, oh yes, that's true, everything is empty in nature, but it's very real, isn't it? So we go very close to understanding its empty nature, the absolute truth, but the apparentness becomes so very strong that to remain unshaken from the understanding that ultimately it is empty becomes very difficult, especially for those who are very dependent upon the senses and the senses conceptualization. To be able to counteract that, Vajrayana Buddhism and the remarkable, very sort of skillful method of the Vajrayana teachings began to generate two methods. One is called the creation and one is called the completion. creation stage is just a creation of visually as well as sound and mind, all three factors. The form, the sound, and the mind, all of these three, which captures the sense and the sense faculties, capacities, and potentials. In building up, creation is building from nothing to a fantastic creation. And then the second stage, Sampanna Krama, Dzogrim, or the completion stage, as it is called, is a sense of dissolving what you have created into its own nature. And so, from nothing, from not having any concept, you create what is called the mandala. And that's elaborate creations of diverse kinds. And there is no saying how elaborate it can be. It can be very simple. It can be tremendously complicated and elaborate. But you create it, and you have the capacity. Visually, you have the capacity to do it. Orally, you have the capacity to do it. And of course, everything is founded on the foundation of your mind. So you begin to, as a meditator, understand how creative your mind is in creation. And completion is, again, just the deconstruction part of it, and your mind doing it. And so Vajrayana meditators and those of you who know, we say, well, minimum do it 1,000,000 times. So 100,000 times or 100,000 times or 1,000,000 times, when you do the same thing, when you keep constructing from nothing and you keep deconstructing into nothing, gradually it brings about a first-hand experience, meditative experience, to what the Mahayana Madhyamikas have always said. Every appearance is mind's own projection. How is like this. That is how Vajrayanas then teach, is about how it is actually done. Let me, just to sort of simplify this, just give you an example, is, there used to be, this is an analogy often given in this context, there used to be a very dedicated monk who tried to understand absolute truth of emptiness, never got it. And so his teacher, a geshe, told him, you should, I'll give you a special mantra and a visualization. You should go and do this practice in a 3 years retreat and then find out how it is. And so the Geshe-la gave him the practice of Jigje. It's a form of Yamantaka, very ferocious, wrathful deity with 2 horns, very big pointed horns. And he said, this is how you visualize, and so visualize yourself as the deity and do this mantra so many 100,000 times. And so the student went, he was very dedicated, diligent. So he sat in his little cave and he meditated for many, many years on this visualization. And then his teacher began to be a little bit concerned because he never came down after the 3 years. And he sent a message and said, come down. And so the student sent a message, the monk sent a message to his teacher saying, yes, I will come down next week. Next week passed by, the student didn't turn up. So now the teacher became very worried, and so he went himself and he asked the student, why didn't you come out? I called you twice, and why didn't you come out? And the student said, well, I wanted to very much come and prostrate in your presence, but the thing is that the door is so small to the entrance, and my horns keep getting stuck to the entrance, and I can't come out. This analogy is not given in any other context, but to really give a sense of how your mind can project so much, is that to him, he never knew what Jigje was. He never knew what this deity was. But when you take time to familiarize your mind with a certain concept, it can become so very rigid so as to imagine. He didn't have horns. If a person looked at the monk, his head was just as, bald, without any kind of, horns or any growth. That was not it. But the concept of it being there, constantly visualizing it, was such that he really had problems coming out of the door. Now, in that same way, when we look at ourselves, habitual tendencies, all that we are today and all that we have created is our own mind's projection, but we're so familiar with it that it seems so very real, isn't it? Hope, what is it? But that is what we spend our entire life with. Insecurity, what is it? We don't know. We can never really articulate and say, this is what is insecurity, or this is what is fear. But nevertheless, it is strong enough that we never move or say anything as long as it has not been passed through the checkpoints of hope and fear. So in that same way, concepts and creations and how that habitual tendencies of concepts and creation makes things more real than they actually are then taught about through the creation and the completion stages of the Vajrayana tradition, or the relative and the absolute truth from the Mahayana and Madhyamika tradition. But both of these methods, whether you're going through the Mahayana way or whether you're going through the Vajrayana methods, both of these ways point towards one thing, is to realize how powerful your mind is. Both of these traditions or methods of training give the meditator a deeper sense of understanding. Oh yes, ultimately it is me. Ultimately it is my mind. This, what I say I, this, what I call me, this, which I think is the origin of everything, every creation, every projection, this, what I will temporarily call my mind, is intrinsic of my own self. Goodness evolves from within. Badness evolves from within. Positivities evolve from within. Negativities also evolve from within. And therefore, the first step of realizing, number one, the power of your own mind and the creations, every creation, projection arising from your own mind. Secondly, therefore, how much one has to be responsible for that which is your own intrinsic. And therefore, all virtues arise from my mind. All unvirtuous arises from my mind. All the positivities arise from my mind. All the negativities arise from mind. And therefore, if it is my mind, how important it is to therefore tame my own mind. And so, recognizing that ignorance also is your mind, wisdom is also your mind. Samsara and the creation of every suffering of samsara is also from yourself. Likewise, all goodness and positivities, realization and enlightenment, compassion and kindness and selflessness and truth also arises within the frame of your own mind. And so, being able to recognize the power of your mind is the third karma of empowering, is where you empower yourself, beginning to really realize how important, how strong, how very powerful that mind is within one's own self. Very closely related to the fourth karma of subjugating. Subduing simply is taming your own mind. Remembering and seeing how important, how powerful your mind is one thing. But on the other hand, then everything is in your hands. Suffering, pain, everything that you want to be free from is also entirely up to you. Likewise, continuation of the pain and suffering, the ignorance and the duality is also up to you. Cessation is also up to you. Liberation is also up to you. Confusion and suffering and cyclic existence is also up to you. Therefore, since it is up to me, it is entirely up to my mindfulness of the mind that can allow me to then create what I want. And so if you really want to be compassionate to the sentient beings, tame your mind, subdue your mind. Subdue the mind so that it doesn't generate ignorance, but more mindfulness at all times. If it is true bodhicitta that you want to practice and benefit sentient beings, subjugate your klesha mind so that the desires are impeded and instead selfless kindness always evolves. Instead of aggression, gentleness and patience, genuine cause of happiness to the others. Instead of arrogance, humility, pliability, being able to be supple and flexible. Instead of jealousy, being really happy at the achievements of the others. In that way, when you tame your own klesha mind, the three kleshas, ignorance, desire, and anger, or 5 kleshas, you add jealousy and hatred. 6 kleshas, you add arrogance to it, also ego to it. And so those kleshas, if you can check that, and then be able to really take out, transform it, and instead generate their opposing factors, then that is subjugating your mind. When you subjugate, when you tame your own mind, what is it other than bodhicitta? That itself is kindness. A kindness that is much more appreciated, much more helpful to the other sentient beings than simply sitting in meditation and sort of doing a lot of different kinds of exercises that may help, may not help. But if you are able to really apply the view of the meditation, of compassion, of selfless bodhicitta into action, then that is immediate help that you can give to the others. And such practices are necessary for all meditators. Otherwise, everyone is going to simply remain in the level of intellectualization, which I think is good for a lifetime. And if we had only one life and nothing else happened after that, then the more the intelligent, the more wisecracking the person became, meditator became, we could always say that is good, but it's not so. If you've heard the teachings, if you've understood Buddha Dharma four things that are very essential. Precious human birth, impermanence, karma, and subsequent causes of the karma that lead to the diverse experiences of the 6 realms. All of the 4 fundamental truths that have to be kept in mind by meditators. From that aspect, you will find that more important than intellectually sort of thinking about Dharma is actually practicing the Dharma in your own life. And so 4 karmas or 4 activities of pacifying your own sort of stillness of the body and speech and mind, pacifying body, speech, and mind, being able to really practice virtue all the time, practice virtue as much as possible, recognize how powerful your mind is, and tame the mind always. If those 4 activities are cultivated in your own self, you will find that then there is some reason to being a meditator. There is some reason that with which you enter into a shrine room and sit in a meditation. There is aim in actually doing the things that are there. Otherwise, what are we Buddhists for? Write another book, isn't it? Tell others what to do and never do it yourself, isn't it? So that shouldn't happen. So as much as possible, think very carefully. Ultimately, you have to always keep in mind that you never practice Dharma for anyone else but your own selves. When you're true to your own self and you practice Dharma properly to benefit yourself, spontaneously benefiting the others will come about. You don't have to think about the others. It's just a spontaneous result of it. In the race for trying to do it for everyone else but never really looking after your own self, you'll never get that accomplished and your life will also go to waste. So don't do that. Okay? So, for as much as the 4 karmas and connection, then I think this much today. And then in terms of the potentials, what I'd like to, as I said before, is connect the 4 karmas with the 3 potentials as the Buddha taught. And so what are called the 3 kinds of intentions with which we meditate and with which we practice. And so Khandro Rinpoche's very prominent student, Chökyi Drakpa's commentary on called The Perfect Vase has a certain excerpt which talks about the Mahayana teachings and the 3 potentials. So I thought for the Saturday and Sunday I'll stick to a traditional text. Okay? All right.